everybody. My name is Doug Thistlethwaite, and I'm going to talk to you about stories. We're all storytellers. We tell stories to share knowledge, to share our experience, and to share our take on the world. The stories we tell are just a part of a whole story that encompasses all points of view. The details we remember and share show who we are. Depending on where we are, or who or what is listening, we craft the stories we tell with our point of view and change what we emphasize. Lanterns is a site-specific sound and light installation that explores unmoderated storytelling. My goal with this project was to experiment with collecting and sharing stories between members of a community through a physical object set up in a communal public space. This is some footage I shot when I went and set up my prototype in Socrates Sculpture Park in Queens. I set up the installation to play back stories when somebody walks underneath the lantern. The one that plays back here is an example of one of those stories.
So the first day I arrived in Amman, Jordan, it was after about 20 hours of flying. And I arrive, it's a day in the future because they're so far ahead of time. And it's almost sunset, and the smell is amazing. It smells of spices like cardamom and coffee and just different kinds of food smells, bread, oil, things like that. And the first thing that I was taken to go see was on the patio of where I was going to be working. We looked out onto the city, which was a bunch of valleys and thousands of apartments and buildings and mosques. And all of the mosques started going off at the same time, but slightly delayed from one another. And it would echo through the valleys. It was the most beautiful sound. And it woke up all the pigeons from the roofs, and these pigeons would fly around in flocks at the same time. So the whole thing was very magical and very strange. And it never really got normal. But that's when it was at its most strange.
The story you just heard was told out of this very lantern by someone who was here before you, right where you're standing. In order to leave your story, just start talking about a place you've been or a place you like.
At this point, if a person wants to input their own story, they can just start speaking. If they just want to keep listening to stories, they can just stay underneath the lantern and another story will start. The user experience of lanterns is a light and sound installation that asks for participation. That said, in developing this piece, I've had to explore what the nature of storytelling is in conjunction with my own personal interests. Some of the things I looked into were what are different storytelling spaces, how have objects been used in facilitating storytelling, and how can technology play a role from behind the scenes. Embarking on my thesis, I wanted to work on a project that touched on a lot of what I learned here at ITP, while taking on some other challenges that piqued my interest, but I never really got a chance to explore. Sharing memories through objects is an idea I first hatched in PComp with my memory jar project. Giving light physicality was a theme in this Islands project from Spatial Media, where you could actually pick up small people that were made of light and move them around like objects. Another Spatial Media project captured portraits of people entering the floor and displayed the remnant of who was there before to people as they were leaving. In Design Expo, my group and I endeavored to create a platform for people to share their neighborhoods with their friends and family, and even strangers. I also wanted my thesis to go further in my experience that I've been developing site-specific artwork. And I also wanted to include some technology I've been working on in wildlife tracking class and beyond that class as well. Combining all this together, I came up with the concept for lanterns. While I had a general idea of what I wanted to do, the first thing I had to explore was what makes for good storytelling. When I began to investigate story collection, the obvious place to begin was StoryCorps. I talked to a few people who worked as audio engineers and moderators for StoryCorps. Their focus is very community-oriented. By focusing on gathering stories to share with the world, they strive to show similarities between disparate cultures. I took away from talking to them that going where the stories are is where you get great content. But with my project, I wanted to be a little less hands-on and see how that changed things. My investigation, I also looked at a lot of Jonathan Harris's work. He has done an amazingly wide study of story, character, and arc in storytelling, dissecting stories into basic parts and showing how these individual pieces can be the focal point of a narrative. We Feel Fine uses emotion and feelings as a central link to reveal the frequency of common stories on Twitter. Balloons of Bhutan uses an object to reveal a community through the breadth of individual wishes. In the Whale Hunt project, he completely immersed himself in an entire story, showing that one experience and any number of narrative permutations is possible. His work brings out snippets of people's lives and frames them in a way that we can build out the rest of the story on our own with our own knowledge. They're short stories, but they have lots of impact. And finally, in his study of how narrative relates to intelligence, Roger Schenck posits that telling of a story is shaped not only by the memory of the experience itself, but the environment in which the story is being told. In other words, context is everything. I sat on all this for a while and other research, and tried to think about what would be a successful prompt for my project. I wanted to get stories from people at a specific location, so why not ask them about location? Personally, the first time I go somewhere, my memories of those places are very distinct and vivid. I'm hyper aware of my surroundings, and I take in more detail because I'm unsure of what's out of place and what's normal. Per my inspiration for this project, I asked myself what object would facilitate the telling of that story. Lanterns and streetlights are mainstays of the public sphere. They light the way for people. They provide a space for people to come together and mill about and really just interact with each other. Another metaphor I worked with is the lighthouse. Through light, it provides information to people and guidance about the surrounding area. And I also looked at paper lanterns that have an amazing association with letting go of something personal and putting it out into the world. So how does all this fit together? Well, with my lantern, there's pretty lights. And pretty lights will attract somebody to come and investigate the lantern. A sensor will then pick up when they're underneath the lantern and they'll be spotlit. That's when the story will start playing back from a parabolic speaker. After the person hears the story and then is prompted, they can tell back their story up into the speaker, into the microphone that's there as well. Now, there's a great thing about a parabolic shape. It's got a focal zone. And in that focal zone is where I put a microphone and a speaker. From that speaker is all the audio that comes out is then reflected directly down underneath the lantern. So other people who are around the lantern actually don't hear what the story is being told. Only when you're underneath that specific spot is when you can hear it. The same is also true for audio going into the parabola. All the audio from directly underneath the lantern is amplified into the microphone, whereas the sounds from around don't get picked up. This is very important when I was planning on having an outdoor installation where there's going to be lots of ambient sound. The stories are then, from the microphone, are then recorded to a computer inside the lantern. After somebody leaves, the lantern then connects up to a cloud server using GSM technology. This technology is the same technology you have your phone when you get data on your data plan. You can upload and download audio as well as videos. And so here I'm uploading audio. I can upload audio, and then once this audio is there, the collected stories from the day, I can then curate them as the artist of, because I don't really want people to be like, blah, 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 I'm under a lantern. You're not really going to listen to that. You don't really want to listen to that. So I can cut out those stories and also possibly edit down other stories. And then I can put back into the lantern for the next day these curated stories. I installed the lantern in two places. One was Socrates Sculpture Park on a very beautiful day. It was a weekend, lots of people around. The other was Fort Greene Park on a coolish evening, and really only a few neighborhood people were there. After installing this piece, I learned a few things about the differences in these two locations. In a busy location, people, like Socrates Sculpture Park, people are distracted by who's around and what's going on. There's a lot of things going on in the park, and they're not really paying attention when they're underneath the lantern or listening to the stories. But when it's a lot quieter and there's not much going on, people really engaged. They listened, they wanted to know more, and I even got one person to input a story. Great. Day versus night. The daytime was sort of the same idea. There was a lot to see, and also the lights in the lantern didn't really engage people. But at night, it really drew people to the lantern, like insects, coming to the light. And people were engaged all the way, like from very far away. They saw it, and I could actually see them walk over to the lantern. And also, there's a major difference between these two parks. Socrates Sculpture Park is an art park. It has sculptures in it, and so people would come expecting art. And what they would do is they actually come up and be like, "Art, okay, now I'm done." And this was they didn't engage very much. But in Fort Greene Park, it was a community park, and the people there was something new in their community. There was something they wanted to explore. They wanted to see why I was there and figure it out. And that actually will lend itself a lot to the user interaction. Next, I want to create multiple weatherized lanterns and get some funding to take this from a prototype phase into multiple iterations. I also want to sort of get permission to install it longer term for possibly a season over the summer. And I also want to explore different types of prompts, having professionals read the prompts so it's not just me talking, and also other types of stories. This project has really gotten me excited about stories. In gathering these stories, I've learned so much about the people around me that I may have never learned. With lanterns, I really hope I can bring that same experience to many other people. I want to thank Morgan Wolf, my partner, for really pushing me on this project, and my family and friends who are watching at home. Catherine, Dylan, Nancy, Tom, Georgia, Marianne, Eric, Marina, you guys helped me a lot along the way. Jason and Eric for helping me with the installations. Red for providing the space at ITP, and all my other friends at ITP here. Thank you.